If you carry a firearm and discharge your weapon in self-defense, you could face hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and expenses. So carry the protection of CCW Safe, Self-Defense Legal Services membership. Upfront payment of all criminal and civil defense costs with no out-of-pocket for members. Unlimited defense budgets, unmatched legal expertise. Carry the same level of support police officers have. Carry CCW Safe, the highest caliber.
Hey everyone, welcome. And we are here with another episode of Survival Dispatch News.
Every $50 you make, that gets me. Hold
on. We've got a little bit of feedback here. So where truth matters and preparation isn't just smart, it's essential. I'm speaking to you, and on this blessed Sunday evening, grateful for another day of freedom in America. So we're going to get rolling, and I am John Wheaton of the Righteous Savages, host of tonight's episode, and with me is my common co-host or cohort in S2, our resident.
Oh, there we go with the ground loop again.
President. Everybody, now this proves that John is actually a robot, and he's got a glitch in his software. He's a fembot.
Yeah, hold on just a second. Let me apologize for this. I don't know what is going on, but let's try. How is that? Is that better?
Well,
we don't ever know when it's coming. It just happens.
Changed my microphone
from Austin Powers.
I changed my microphone source, so we'll see if that helps. I don't know what is going on. There are some gremlins in the machines, but we're going to press on as well as we can. And also joining with me today is Mr. Jeff MD, CIA extraordinaire, one of the good ones.
Retired.
Yeah, retired, yes. And we're going to be diving deep into a crucial history lesson with no fluff. Just what you need to know, from peasant roots to revolutionary firebrand, the ideological clash between Mao and Chiang Kai-shek, as well as the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, and everything that went into Mao's China. His enduring legacy continues to impact global politics to this day, and religious freedom. Understanding the brutal reality of communism isn't just an academic exercise. It's essential knowledge for everyone concerned about America's future. Because as we continue on this series, you guys are going to see that communism is not dead. It is just rebranded and repackaged, and it's the same ideology. So before we get started, a couple quick announcements. Myself and Chris will be heading down to WAFT on Tuesday the 20th. So mark your calendars. We'll be doing a special live stream from our training that we're doing down there. So that should be really exciting. Also, on the Righteous Savages front, we are beginning an online training series that is due to be out in midsummer. And this is going to be a basic handgun carbine instruction with 3 levels. And it's going to be available online for the entire thing is going to be available to our paid subscribers on our Substack. And then also there are going to be certain sections of it that are going to be free to everyone because we want to be able to give this information to everyone. So be an opportunity for you guys to sharpen your skills without leaving your home. So keep an eye out for that. We're moving on to headline news. And the first bit of news is that the ATF is facing some backlash. Let me get this shared here real quick. I lost everything, it seems like. Here we go. There we go. I apologize for that. But the ATF is facing backlash because of the uncovering of a illegal tracking system that was outside of their normal, which is supposed to be a blind authorization of purchasing a firearm. So it is a revelation of an internal memo detailing a program designed to track lawful gun owners across the United States. According to the documents made public through FOIA requests, the agency has been maintaining a database that flags citizens who purchase multiple firearms within a short time frame, even when these purchases are completely legal under the federal and state laws. The program, reportedly operational since 2017, allows federal agents to receive automatic alerts when individual buyers acquire more than one firearm from a federally licensed dealer within a 5-day period. Second Amendment advocacy groups have condemned this practice as an unconstitutional registry that violates the rights of law-abiding citizens. Give you guys a real quick snap reaction to that revelation. I don't think it's surprising, but it's always shocking.
I am shocked that there's gambling going on in this establishment.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. And just like they don't have a searchable database either.
No,
Wonder how they found out the rifle that was used belonged to Thomas Crook's dad. Within 2 hours.
Just real good investigative work.
Yep.
That's what it was. Yep.
Yeah. They had the guy from Men in Black sorting through the files in the connexes out back.
Yep.
Real fast.
Yes.
Well, and I think that, this is something, the founding fathers enshrined the Second Amendment into our Constitution for a reason, and that was because they had just fled tyranny. They just fought a war against tyranny, and they wanted everybody to have the right to keep and bear their own arms. I mean, remember, Lexington and Concord was fought. The revolution started because the British were coming to pick up guns that they knew that the Minutemen had, and they were trying to stop them from owning their own guns. So this is not something new. It is.
Saturday Night Live had a really good skit, believe it or not, and they've been sucking for decades. Did you see it?
Yes.
Where the person from the future is talking to James Madison and says, "Yeah, you're just talking about muzzle loaders, right?" And he's like, "What? Do you trust the government?" "No, of course not." "Then why do you want them to have better guns than you?"
Yep. Yep. And that's the reality of it. It was never meant for just muskets. I mean, they had rapid fire weapons back then. Spoiler alert. That the founding fathers knew about and were fans of, by the way. So
they had actual machine guns.
Yep.
They also had cannons.
Yep. And here's another little. We'll get off this subject because we have to move on. But do you know that a large percentage of the southern states in the Civil War, the cannons were privately owned that were in that army?
Yep.
Would not surprise me.
I mean, yeah. And like there are letters from founders to privateers, private shipping owners that carried merchandise across the ocean about, hey, can we own cannons? They're like, yes, that's actually implied. That's the whole idea of the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
So anyways, moving on to the next big news article. This is the classified documents from Russiagate are starting to be released, and the previously classified Russiagate by our new FBI heads, Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. But the previously classified Russiagate documents have finally been released, confirming what many conservatives have suspected for years. These documents expose how the FBI and the Department of Justice systematically misrepresented them and manipulated intelligence to justify their investigation of the Trump campaign and administrations. The documents reveal that key officials knew the Steele dossier contained unverified and potentially false information, and they presented it to the FISA court as credible intelligence. Communication between the agency leadership showed deliberate efforts to undermine the incoming administration based on political motivated allegations rather than legitimate national security concerns. This is the same thing as the first story. It's not surprising to us that have been paying attention on this. And I'll give you guys, you gentlemen, a reaction for this, and then we'll play a portion of this video that I have queued up.
Yeah,
Tell me something I didn't know. Tell me something I didn't know already.
Yep. Jeff, what were your
No, I'm saying I'm shocked that there is actually more gambling going on in this location.
Exactly. Let's play this.
And drinking too.
Yes. And ladies of the night swarming around. Here we go. About 2 minutes, 39 seconds. Probably won't play the whole thing, but this was Kash Patel and Dan Bongino on Fox Business Sunday morning earlier today.
Well, Dan, throughout the Russia collusion story and the rest.
Look, I can speak to the folks that were in our seats, our predecessors, and they intentionally failed the American public by putting on the biggest DC deception game we've ever seen. They said the FBI was the most storied institution for law enforcement, and it was. And it will be again very soon. But when the likes of Comey and McCabe and Strzok and company came in here with the James Bakers of the world and intentionally lied to a federal court only to rig a presidential election by lying to the American public and using taxpayer dollars, likely illegally, to fund this entire operation, and then withhold exculpatory information from a federal court that I used to appear before to manhunt terrorists, that's what broke the FBI. And then when they were caught, they lied about it. And you and a few others like Dan and others were brave enough to cover it 6, 7, 8 years ago. And we're still talking about it today because as Congress is working rigorously with us, the Crossfire Hurricane documents are coming fast and hard, and they're being sent there unredacted so we can have full accountability. And that's how you restore what the trust that was lost to the American public when it comes to the FBI.
Yeah, but come on, Director, with all due respect, we've been talking about this for a long time, and I've been demanding accountability for many, many years. You mentioned Comey, Strzok, and the rest. They've got TV shows. They've got media platforms. They're fine. There's been no accountability.
Well, look, it's a fair criticism, but what I will tell people is we weren't here in the FBI in the last 5 years when we had statute of limitations that were still in play, where we could have investigated criminal conduct. Most of these statute of limitations are 5 years old. And we will investigate criminal conduct where we find a righteous case to do so, and the law and the facts allow us to. But a lot of it we're precluded from. So we'll take the criticism, and it's rightfully so. That could we have done more in the past? Sure, people before us could have, but what we can do now is continue to put out the documents and the information that these people withheld from the American public. And I'm just telling you right now, as much as we know about Crossfire Hurricane, he and I just found out more last week. And we're continuing to work with Congress to put those documents out. That's how vindictive and vicious the former leadership structure here was. Not only did they bastardize the FISA process and lie to the American public, they withheld and hid documentation and put it in rooms where people weren't supposed to look. And it's a good thing we're here now to clean it up, and you're about to see a wave of transparency.
All right. So quick reactions to that. I'll go to you first, Jeff, and then S2.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is stuff that we all knew was going on. And I'm just happy that they were stupid enough to leave stuff in writing for these guys to find. I'm sure they tried to purge this stuff, which is a federal crime in and of itself, and they missed some stuff. And the more electronic information you have, the harder it is to get rid of all of it. So, you think it's deleted, it's not. But, again, statute of limitations being what it is, you're going to be hard pressed to file charges against any of these people.
Yeah. S2.
Didn't know treason had a statute of limitations.
I mean, that's a fair point.
Good point.
This is,
and the other name that you didn't hear mentioned in all of this either was Brennan. You didn't hear John Brennan's name mentioned at all.
Well, and
he's supposedly in Argentina now.
Oh, with all the other Nazis?
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, and I was thinking about this the other day. Obviously, we want to see movement. We want to see people in handcuffs, and I hope that comes down the pike. But I think that Kash kind of said, hey, we're still finding out stuff. There wasn't anybody that was all over the Russiagate scandal more than Dan Bongino at the beginning. He was the guy that broke all of the stuff. Said, guys, this doesn't make sense. This smells like rotten fish. We need to investigate this, and we need to figure out where this came from. And he's been all over it from the get-go. In fact, I would argue a lot of his popularity grew because of the Russiagate. His platform grew dramatically because he was putting out all this information. And they're still learning stuff, which means that the web that they're having to untangle and probably read through the stuff and connect the dots through stuff that was deleted and acid washed. You guys know about this in the intel world. It's piecing together pieces that don't necessarily completely connect, but they have kind of this broad connection. And it's just really reading and mapping these things out. And that takes time. It really does.
There's a lot of time.
Yep.
And the databases,
and the other thing is, if you're going to put a case together to be presented in a federal court, it better be rock solid, and there better be no missing crossed T's or dotted I's, because if you can people get off on technicalities all the time in those things. And so you've got to have a rock solid case.
One question I have is, why did Secret Service escort James Comey to the FBI field office to be questioned? Why did he need the Secret Service to escort him there?
Yeah. I mean, that's true. And then he let go after basically threatening the president, which was interesting, but he didn't know what 86 meant. So yeah, I've done this since I was 17 years old. Yeah. Well, we all know that it's that, but yeah. But anyways, those are the two big headlines we're discussing. And now we're going to move on to our main topic. And today we're going to dive into a subject that might seem a little distant. And a lot of this stuff that we've covered so far in this series has been very distant memory, or distant from our daily concerns. But actually, it offers a critical insight to the freedom-loving Americans like us. And we're going to explore the rise of Mao Zedong and his devastating grip of communism he imposed on China. So the starting of this is really very similar timing to the Lenin Revolution and Stalin moving into power as well after Lenin passed away. And there's a lot of similarities, but when it comes to body count, I don't think anybody touches Mao. Mao was a ruthless tyrant. And as conservatives, we understand that history provides lessons that we can't ignore. If we do ignore, it's at our own peril. And the story of Mao's China offers maybe one of the starkest examples of how quickly a nation can descend into tyranny when power becomes concentrated in the hands of an ideologue. And that's really, what Mao was. So we're going to start to dive into this. So as we get into it, you guys are going to see a very, very dark picture. First off, Mao Zedong was born on December 26th, a late Christmas present to humanity, 1893, in the village of Shaoxing of the Hunan province, to a peasant family. Now, a quick reminder to everybody, and Jeff actually pointed this out. He was a peasant and born into a peasant class, but his father actually rose to quite a bit of prominence. So it's kind of an interesting thing. And Jeff, I'll let you speak to that really quick, how the correlations between that a lot of these communist leaders weren't actually of the people. They were actually very wealthy and come from very prominent families.
Yeah, I mean, they called peasant class. That was the class. He wasn't poor. His father was born poor, but grew to be a wealthy landowner. And so Mao did not grow up in poverty by any stretch of the imagination. He was very comfortable growing up as a kid. And we see it today, I think, with a lot of the leftists here. The reason they can afford to be leftists is because mommy and daddy take care of them.
Yes.
If they had to work for a living, if they had to pay their own rent, they wouldn't have time to be radical leftists.
Yeah. Yeah. And you'll see, actually, it was the May 4th movement that initially radicalized him. That was in 1919. So timing wise, very similar to the Russian Revolution. That was in 1917, 1918. So
1718, yeah.
Yeah. So he helped found the Communist Party of China in 1921. He was initially not interested in communism, but he helped then just a few years later helps found the Communist Party of China in 1921. He eventually rose to leader of the communist forces following a long march retreat from the nationalist forces in the 1930s. So to kind of lay the groundwork, and then I'll let S2 and then Jeff speak to this, is what we have to understand is when he grew and came to power, there were two factions in China at the time. The nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek, and then the communists under Mao Zedong. And there was really a groundwork of World War II was what really led to communism taking over post World War II. We'll get to that in a minute, but there were really two factions. So you had two warring parties, kind of like you always do in these kind of situations. But a lot of times the more ruthless ideologues actually end up winning out because they don't really care who they hurt. S2, anything to add to that?
Well, there was a lot of events that happened, but initially Mao focused on organizing the peasants, and then and that was basically diverging from his urban worker centric approach of the other CCP leaders. And you had some events is that after the nationalists, the Kuomintang under Chiang Kai-shek turned on communists in 1927, and then Mao established a rural base in Jiangxi, where he started to build his guerrilla force of the peasants and implemented land reforms to gain peasants' support, emphasizing that they were going to be able to get land and things like that, basically lying to the people. And what the Long March ended up being is that they were facing the Kuomintang encirclement, and Mao led the CCP on a 6,000-mile retreat called the Long March to Shaanxi, and that was basically after all of the losses that he sustained from Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang. So he took a very large departure in that usually communists try to organize their revolutions from within the urban populace versus the peasants, but because he had a peasant upbringing and background, it made more sense for him to go to the rural countrysides and do his organizing there. So
Yep. And one of the precursors that we'll touch on just briefly was the 1911 revolution, which really kind of set this in motion. Was the killing off of the Qing dynasty and establishing the Republic of China, because China was a republic. Much so, the United States is a republic. The idea behind a republic is you have some democracy elements, but it's proportional representation of all of the areas. So all of the provinces had representation, much like our Congress would. So it was actually a republic at the time, which you had a nationalistic side and then the communist side as they rose in the late 19 teens. So the revolution ended and on February 12th, 1912, marking the end of a 2,000-year imperial rule and beginning China's early republic era. So prior to that revolution, which made China a republic, it was an empire. So you had an emperor, you had, very much like Rome, I guess you could bring to draw a parallel to it, that you had, or Japan. Japan remained an empire until after World War II. So a lot of Asian countries in the ancient world were empirical in a lot of ways. And so they shifted to a republic after that revolution, but then that was short-lived because less than 25, 30 years later, they had dove into being a communist dictatorship. So any other details that I may not have fully fleshed out there about the revolution?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay. All right. Now we move on to the other leader, Chiang Kai-shek. So Chiang Kai-shek was the nationalist government leader from 1928 until his defeat in 1949 by the communist forces. Both of these forces worked together to defeat the Japanese because the Japanese actually invaded China. I think it was in 1937, if I remember correctly.
36, 37, something
Yeah.
like that.
And so that was one of Japan's first movements in growing their empire, trying to take over all of the Pacific Islands and all of the rich natural resources that China had, because they saw what we still see today is that China has some of the richest natural resources in the world. So it was for them to grow, they needed those resources. So they invaded. The nationalist and communist forces took a break and helped each other out. But while this was going on, and what I have read about this is that Mao was very strategic in the way that he helped Chiang Kai-shek and his forces, is that he would always allow the Shek forces to take the brunt of these assaults by the Japanese troops and kind of hold his men in reserve, allowing them to suffer heavier losses, so that when post-war, when they kind of resumed their war, he was able to easily, over a few years, basically beat the nationalist forces and take over power. The reason, and this is kind of a key thing for today's political landscape, is that because Chiang Kai-shek's forces lost, they were exiled to an island called Taiwan. The reason Taiwan exists is because of the loss in the nationalist forces there in that civil war, basically. I'll give you guys a chance to speak on Chiang Kai-shek, Mao, and that kind of history of the conflict and how that kind of played out. Jeff, you can go first there.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, they had fought, after the fall of the Qing dynasty, they were fighting for control over China. They'd fought for years, and Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang were basically winning. Then the Japanese invaded. So they joined forces to fight the Japanese. I think it was 1936, which is, in actuality, the start of World War II. So they did, and you're right. I mean, Mao said, "Yeah, you guys go out there and charge. You go, charge that hill, and we'll be back here. We'll cover your six just in case. We'll make sure they don't sneak up behind you."
Our intelligence says they're going to come around this way, so we'll guard that. You go that way.
Yeah, we'll guard the back. We'll get the supply train to be good. And then after the war, Mao had took that advantage, and they were all over the country now. They were in the cities. And so, when they resumed their civil war, they won. Chiang Kai-shek was a nationalist, and he wasn't always a nice guy. He killed a whole bunch of innocent people as well. There are no heroes in this story, shall we say. But then he, they had they bugged out and went to Taiwan, and that's where it was a Republic of China for years, until Nixon, said, well, one China policy, and then we kind of quit recognizing them as their own country, but still sold them weapons. What Mao's true evil really manifests itself after the end of the Civil War, and that's when his evil side, really comes through.
Yep. And that's really what we've been doing the last 15 minutes, is really kind of laying the groundwork for what comes next. And this is really where it gets nasty. S2, you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think one of the things that's important to understand is the amount of deception that Mao undertook in trying to become allies with Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek was, for all intents and purposes, he was a drug dealer. That was his primary business. He was a nationalist. Okay, yep, that's great. But Mao tried to position the CCP as a nationalist force also, which was a complete deception done through propaganda, education, and what they called rectification campaigns to unify the party under his ideology. So I think it's important to understand that when we talk about communists and we talk about today's, what are we calling them today? We're calling them revolutionaries today. We don't call them communists. We call them socialist revolutionaries, because that's what they are, and that's exactly what Mao began as.
Yes. Yep. And so the 1949 exile really marked the beginning of this. And Mao actually initially faced a lot of challenges in gaining support after the 49 communist victory, particularly with the intellectuals who questioned his leadership. Mao responded by launching increasingly radical campaigns to eliminate opposition and consolidate power. So he really started moving through the institutions using a lot of tactics we see today, and we'll get to that. But so following the catastrophic Great Leap Forward, causing tens of millions of deaths, Mao was temporarily even sidelined by the Communist Party. So this is about a decade-long period that we're talking about here, from 49 to about, I think, 58, if I'm remembering correctly. And then after that was the Cultural Revolution, which we will get to. But really, the first one was his move into power in 1949, and what he did to take control of that. He tried to basically, just like Stalin, just like Lenin, just like everyone else, don't have a debate, eliminate your opposition. And that's what we see today now. But S2, you want to speak to this really, really quickly on where this all kind of played out?
Well, it ultimately ended up playing with to the Great Leap Forward.
Mm-hmm.
So the Great Leap Forward was an economic and social campaign that was launched by Mao and the Chinese Communist Party, and that went on from 1958 to 1962.
Mm-hmm.
And what they were trying to do is they were trying to rapidly transform China from an agrarian society into an industrialized socialist state. And Mao was looking to surpass Western economies by mobilizing his population to boost agricultural and industrial output. And in particular, he had some things that he was focusing on was steel production through what they call collectivization and mass labor. Collectivization is another term that is still used today when we talk about things in terms of communism. In the rural, well, I'm getting ahead of myself here, so I'll leave it at that.
No, Jeff, really quick, between like 1949 and really 1958, because 58 is really where we start to see the bloodshed roll. Is there anything that we missed in leading that up politically or anything?
There was a whole lot of bloodshed between 49 and 58. It just wasn't on an industrial scale, and
Right.
it wasn't due to starvation. It was by murdering people.
Yeah.
They went through and they killed, estimates are 900,000 people who were quote unquote bourgeois. You know, these were the landowners. These were the people who owned businesses. Landlords were a particularly favorite target. Mao actually had quotas for how many landlords had to be killed. They had to kill at least one landlord in every village publicly. And in many places, they had a whole bunch more. And Mao, by his own admission, said, yeah, we killed maybe 700,000. But then there was also the reform through labor part of it, which is you weren't worth killing in front of everybody in town, so they'd send you off to a work camp and you died that way.
Yep.
And that was another 2 million people there. So we're still talking several million people. And this isn't, we're just not feeding you and you starve to death. This is, they beat them to death. They hung them. It was public executions. They worked them to death. This was a concerted effort to kill these people.
Yep.
No questions asked.
Yes. And so that, and there were several million people killed in that time period. Then we get to
the Great Leap Forward.
The Great Leap Forward. So Frank Decoder, German name, but he's done an extensive amount of research on this. In fact, he was even allowed to go into China and see documents that a lot of people had not seen before he wrote his book. I think it was like early 2000s was when he wrote his book. Sorry, one of my dogs is barking in the background there. But anyways, so in the Great Leap Forward, Dakota gained unprecedented access to hundreds of previously classified Chinese Communist Party documents in his research. but it reveals the full scope of the tragedy in a lot of ways. Mao actually knew a lot very closely to the amount of number that had been killed. But between 58 and 1962, an estimated 45 million lives were claimed. And this was due to a famine that was originally blamed on bad weather and natural disasters. And it wasn't that. It was a deliberate policy decision made by Mao and his senior leadership. The unrealistic agricultural targets that they put on these peasant farmers. So China was full of a lot of rural farm country, kind of similar to the Midwest and the West in the United States. You think of Kansas, just tons of agriculture out there, even in my state of Illinois. But a lot of these farmers were very poor. They were a peasant class, and they were given unrealistic expectations and targets, and forced collectivism. So they were formed into these groups that had to adhere to certain rules that the Communist Party had put out, and because they could not meet their quotas or their goals, an estimated 2 to 3 million were beaten to death in deliberate killings during these periods to try and force the others to somehow magically generate more crops, to generate more food. And the resulting famine, which was a self-inflicted wound in a lot of ways, took between 40 and 45 million lives. Think about that in a 4-year period. And think about, like, the population of China was not as robust as or big as it is today.
It's about 600 million back then.
Like,
About
yeah,
half our size. About twice our size, I should say.
it's kind of like when you look at the Civil War and you see 600,000 deaths in the Civil War, but you also think that there was like a quarter of the population in America at the time. 600,000 deaths now would be insane, but if you actually had that kind of bloodshed today, it would be like 10 million people.
It'd be 20 million people dying.
Yeah.
In the United States.
Yeah. So you think about stuff on that magnitude, that's insane and crazy. So, like, this is a systematic killing of your own people because they could not meet your unrealistic tasking expectations. So real quick, I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to talk about the Great Leap Forward and the Great Famine that was a result of that.
Well, yeah, there was two aspects to the famine. One was they went to the peasants, they collectivized for one, which was not good. But then they said, okay, you have a quota. And they actually, in 1958, they had a good year. There was perfect weather. Their production actually went up. So they said, hey, we can just raise the quota. Well, the next year there wasn't, the weather sucked and everything went bad. And they would, the farmers were still required to provide X amount of grain to the state so they could then send it to the cities to feed the workers working in the newly established factories, blah, 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 blah. But there was another aspect of that too, is they pulled a lot of the farmers out of the fields to make them work these tiny little blast furnaces and make pig iron and doing all this industrial stuff. So there were fewer farmers to feed the cities, and there were more people in the cities working than they had food for, and certainly more than their distribution could handle. Now, nobody had the balls to tell Mao that, yeah, we screwed up and we don't have as much food, because that would get you killed. So what Beijing was doing, they were still in the middle of this famine, tens of millions of people dying. They were exporting grain, much like the Russians were exporting grain from Ukraine during the Homendor when they killed 3 million people. Yep. Reoccurring theme, maybe?
Yes.
Yeah, so you create a famine, and then what little grain is there, you sell it.
Yep. It is insane to see these parallels throughout history of communist leaders, Marxist leaders, socialist leaders destroying their own people for no reason other than they just want more control of them. It's absolutely insane. S2, I'll give you a chance to talk through the Great Leap Forward.
Yeah, Jeff hit on something I was going to talk about, where they basically they set up millions of small scale furnaces to produce steel, and oftentimes they were using scrap and metal and other household items to meet ambitious production targets. But yeah, they did take the farmers out of the fields and force them to do these things in these little communes that they had set up. And in most cases, private farming, property, even personal kitchens were abolished. Another thing that proves that Mao was an idiot, just like every other communist that tries this crap, he was promoting untested farming techniques. And they had something that they called deep plowing and close planting. And he believed, he was convinced by somebody that this was going to increase crop yields. And like Jeff said, the first year, okay, maybe that did, maybe it didn't. But the fact of the matter is that when you have experienced farmers that have been doing this all their lives, you don't take over what they're doing and say, hey, you're going to do it this way. And then all of a sudden, when it doesn't work, then you blame the farmers for it rather than blaming yourself. This is the time tested theme that we see out of the playbook over and over and over again. I know better than you. You don't know shit.
Yep.
Well, then talking about your law of unintended consequences, there was the 4 pests, and they wanted to wipe out. It was rats, sparrows, mosquitoes, and flies. And the theory with the sparrows was, hey, a sparrow will eat 2 kilograms of grain a year. Each sparrow does. So if we kill the sparrows, we'll have that much more grain available to us. And there was this huge concentrated effort throughout the country to kill sparrows. They'd knock down their nests, they'd kill their babies, break their eggs, and they would bang pots and pans at night when the sparrows came back to roost so they could never sleep and never reproduce. And the sparrow almost went extinct in China. And someone had finally said, dude, sparrows eat bugs too. So because they killed all the sparrows, they had locust invasions. And they lost more crops to the locusts than they could have ever lost to the sparrows. So it's just like stupid stuff like that.
Yeah. And, you know, there's sometimes where I question, I'm like, God, why did you make ticks? Why did you make mosquitoes? Why did you make these things? But there is a purpose for them. And like the bugs, you know.
He hasn't told me what they are yet. I don't see why mosquitoes are there, except to give Purple Martin something to eat.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a tick infestation at the range. I do like just insane levels of ticks. The only thing I'm hoping is I don't get bit by one and get alpha gal, because I love my red meat.
Well, see, I live in Arizona. We don't have ticks.
Well, maybe I need to move to Arizona.
We don't have fleas either. It's too dry.
But you do have tarantulas.
Yeah.
I love tarantulas. They eat bugs. They eat bad bugs, man. I'll pick them up and move them. They're kind of cool. Pretty chill.
So if and here's this is interesting. And if the truth be told, there were 55 million deaths in World War II total. Mao's conquest in between 58 and 62 was 45 million. 10 million short of an entire world war is insane. And it just gives us kind of a barometer of what the devastation was and what legacy Mao left behind. This is a great article from the Heritage Foundation that talks about this insane move that cost an estimated total of 65 million Chinese citizens dying from either execution, imprisonment, or man-made famines that were completely and totally propagated by Mao Zedong and his Cultural Revolution. That happened in 1966, and this was the unleashing of the Red Guards, the young fanatics aged 14 to 21, target revisionists, enemies of the state. They wanted to target these guys, and it was to get rid of the 4 olds. And we'll get to that in a minute. This was his way of marching and destroying the history. And you'll find this in any kind of communistic movement. They don't want any history, and they'll target specific history based off of what they're trying to divide the people on. Think tearing down Confederate general statues from a few years ago. That's a part of our history.
Yeah.
And this was what Mao did as well in his Cultural Revolution. The Red Guards, young fanatics, and you think about that 14 to 21, so that's like high school, college age. If you control the education institutions, you can infect the minds of these young people and cause them to think that they need to go be revolutionaries and target the enemies of the state, which are the people like teachers who know history, intellectuals, the deep thinkers that understand the impact of history. Book burnings were a part of this. Destruction of cultural artifacts, widespread violence against anyone who was accused of having tendencies towards that were anti-communist. So this is all extremely, extremely important for us to draw that parallel and understand that it's the same thing. It's the same kind of stuff. Communism always acts the same way. It may be wrapped a little bit different, but it always acts the same way. And despite devastating human toll, Mao's image and legacy remain largely intact in China, where the Communist Party officially it has an official position that 70% he was 70% right and 30% wrong, even though he killed 65 million people. So let's talk about the Cultural Revolution and all of this information for a few minutes here. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was going to say the Cultural Revolution was kind of a war on intellectuals, but leading up to it, Mao in the 50s, even Mao he saw what happened in Hungary, and he was worried the same thing was going to happen in China. So he kind of loosened things up and kind of let people express themselves, even criticize the government. And he thought that would kind of like be a valve, a release valve to let some of the steam off. Well, they turned out everybody was complaining. There was a lot more than he was expecting. So he clamped back down again. And then what he did is everybody who complained when it was okay to complain, they were the first ones he targeted. And so he systematically went after anybody who would oppose him ideologically, and a lot of senior party levels officials who could challenge him politically. And one of the ones who got caught up in that was Deng Xiaoping. He got thrown in jail and later was rehabilitated. But yeah, he went through and systematically removed anybody he saw as a threat politically. And then the government went after anyone who had the social standing, the moral standing to stand up to them and say this isn't right. Yeah, they all went to re-education camps, and that's where the term re-education camp comes from.
Yep.
And kids were ratting out their parents. A husband would rat out his wife. Kids would, you'd rat out your neighbors, and it was just dystopian. It was like the Stasi in East Germany. Everybody was ratting on everybody.
Yep. Yes, and that is, man, what a lesson from history. S2, you have stuff to add to that?
Yeah, I've seen pictures of the things that they did during that time, and it was a very brutal time. I mean, even down to the point where the idea is if you wanted to get ahead in the Chinese Communist Party, you had to prove your brutality against your fellow man. And they would basically take and kill husbands in front of their wives and their kids. They would take babies from their mothers and literally tear them in pieces. And this was how brutal it was. It was all in the matter. I don't want to say that this was propaganda, but it was propaganda in a sense that it was a way to control the people through fear. And these are the things that they did. Yeah, these are the things they did. So this was particularly brutal.
Well, and shame and humiliation was a huge part of it as well, even if they didn't kill you. And one of the leading causes of death during the time was suicide. And there's stories of people who would jump off of tall buildings to kill themselves. And it happened so often that people wouldn't walk near tall buildings for fear that some guy killing himself would land on them. I mean, we hear about it at the Foxconn factories in China, where they have to put up nets because all the workers try to kill themselves. But the same thing was going on in China. They humiliated people to the point they would kill themselves. And that way they can say, we didn't kill him. He killed himself. Don't look at us, man.
Yes.
Well, and you mentioned the four olds, John. So that's basically old customs, culture, habits, and ideas.
Yep.
And that was to eradicate the traditional Chinese culture, to eradicate the Confucian values, the historical artifacts, and other religious sites, even including clergy.
Yes. Yep. Which kind of moves us into the kind of the final part of this too, is the assault on clergy. And even to this day, there's a lot of religious persecution in China to this day. So it's insane to really think about this stuff, because part of the four olds. So the Chinese government implemented early on in 1941 the three selfs policy, requiring churches to be self-governing, self-supporting, and self-propagating, effectively cutting off any kind of foreign Christian organization. So if you guys have ever been, if you've, are churchgoers or anything like that, most churches have some sort of foreign missions apparatus where they send financial support to missionaries from America or wherever to overseas, or if somebody is over there trying to get a church going, there is a financial support from the free world, I guess you could say, to these more oppressive areas of the country. And so basically the three selfs policy X'd all of that. You could be thrown in jail if you received money from a foreign religious organization to help support so you were self-governing, self-supporting, and self-propagating. You could not actually accept money from anywhere other than just your local organizations. Even that was heavily scrutinized and heavily reduced. So, and then in 1966, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution, as we just spoke of, and the goal was eliminating education and religion. So that's the elimination of the four olds, because part of tradition, part of history, part of all of that is religion as well. So he saw these as a threat to his ideology, as all communists do, ironically. During the period, the churches were closed, Bibles were burned, and Christians faced severe persecution. Many believers went underground, forming what is known as house churches. And despite here's what's really interesting about all of this, and it's kind of a theme when Christians start to be persecuted, it seems like the churches grow. But despite that persecution, Christianity has grown exponentially in China. China currently actually has one of the largest underground church organizations in the history of the world. 1 million Protestants in 1949. It's estimated to be between 49 and 115 million today, depending on the source. But this is while the official three self patriotic movement churches operated with government approval. The unregistered house church movement faces ongoing harassment, surveillance, and repression. Recent years have seen intensification of prosecution by President Xi Jinping, including church closures, cross removals, and detentions of pastors and congregates. The government has implemented a campaign to remove and make Christianity more Chinese, to ensure it's compatible with the Chinese Communist Party ideology. So they're basically trying to create a state church, which is what our First Amendment is about, that we can't create a state. The government can't. That's what they're trying to do, and they can control the ideology that's taught.
Well, they actually did. They called it the Maoist religion.
Yeah.
It was Mao worship, and that was basically the Marxist atheism that was introduced.
Yeah, it's a cult of personality.
Yeah.
But they still have veto power over who the Pope can name as a cardinal in China. And they have a lot of sway over the Catholic Church. It's the Catholic Church that's either you do what we say or you're not going to be able to do anything. But they freaked out over Falun Gong, which was a kind of I don't know how you would describe it. It's almost kind of like a Taoist Confucian, mixed with yoga kind of thing. But it's all about inner self and strength and exercise and all that. But it had so many adherents that they had to clamp down because it was becoming a rival to state power, and that's why they did that huge crackdown and arrest. A lot of them fled. Many were thrown in prison. A lot were simply executed because they represented a spiritual threat to the government.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing because when you read the Bible, as I have several times in my life, when you start to read that ideology, whether you believe in God or not, the morality that comes out of the principles and the teachings of Jesus in Scripture, it teaches you to actually what's really an ironic thing is that Scripture actually will teach you to stand up for the oppressed. It will teach you to help and to give of yourself to people that are less fortunate. That's actually in Scripture, which ironically is what communism always claims it's all about. Is that not ironic that it claims that it's for the little man? So it's going to stamp out religion because religion is oppressive. But actually, when you read the Bible, religion is the best defense system for the oppressed, and over centuries has shifted cultures and countries and empires into, think of the Roman Empire until Constantine became emperor and then actually announced Christianity as an official religion under the Roman Empire. And that was when the explosion of Christianity happened. So in Rome, there's never been an empire, I don't think, aside from maybe some of the ancient empires that was as big as Rome in the last, several millennia. So,
well, yeah, Alexander the Great, he had a huge empire, but it didn't last very long because he died young and it kind of fell apart when he died.
And maybe
then his son took over and everything went to shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is really interesting to me that everything that communism claims it's for is what Christianity is for, which makes you start to think, well, maybe there is a little bit more spiritual to this than what we originally thought. So
I propose this is that the origins of Marxism spawned from Satan himself, who is the father of lies. Therefore, everything they say is a freaking lie, and everything is backwards is forwards.
Yep. And so, we're coming up on a hard stop, guys. So we're gonna start to move. We may be a couple minutes over, but we're coming up on a hard stop. So this next Tuesday, we won't have our normal communism episode. We're going to be at WAFT that day, so we'll be doing a debrief from there. But next Sunday, we're actually going to pick up kind of right where we left off with China, because we kind of went through Mao. We're going to start with China, and then we may roll into some of the lesser, I guess you could say lesser dictators. They don't have as big of a body count, but Pol Pot, Castro, all of these others that are instrumental in this building. And then after that, we get into modern times.
Don't be just a Pol Pot. If you look at it as a percentage of his population, he had the biggest body count.
Yes. Yeah. If you actually look at it, per capita, he was
an overachiever.
Yeah, he was definitely an overachiever in all the wrong ways. But so I think the biggest takeaway, and I'm going to give you guys a chance to talk, the biggest takeaway is that this ideology has never worked. And there are a lot of people that say, oh, it's just never been tried the right way. It's never had the right makeup. And I've seen some of these people, even people on the right, was like, well, if it was tried in an all-white population, it would be fine. And I'm not even joking about that. There's people on crazy people on X that say this stuff. And I'm like, no.
Russia?
You're right. I mean, it has been tried, guys. Like, it's like, goodness gracious, you guys. If you think that communism has just not worked because it hasn't been tried in the right elements or the right climate, no, it's failed, and it has resulted in death, destruction, and loss. By all accounts, by everybody, even the dictators end up losing in the end. So I'm going to give you guys a chance. What are your two big takeaways? Each one of you come up with two big takeaways from where we're at with this communism series, like what we can learn from history and how we apply that to today. And I'll start with you, Jeff, and then we'll go to S2.
Well, I think one thing is I want people to, they look at China today. Yeah, it's a modern country. It's second largest economy in the world. Blah blah blah. But communism didn't make that. They only became successful when they embraced capitalism on the business side.
Yes.
Because that has happened before. They call it what they call it capitalism with a communist face or something along those lines. Someone was smart enough to realize economically communism is a freaking disaster. And so what they've tried to do is keep it on their society while letting their the businesses let their economy become more capitalist. And they've been successful only because they did it on the backs of their workers. They got paid slave wages, and they made stuff for pennies and sold it for dollars. It's not a sustainable system, though.
No, and I would even say today that they're a very big paper tiger. People are a lot more scared. Like, just the tariffs put them into almost ruin. And if you had applied that kind of pressure to them long term, a year, they would have either gone to war over it, or they would have completely collapsed.
Yeah.
It's a paper tiger that everyone seems to be afraid of, but really the politicians, because they're getting paid by these Chinese people. Don't look now, people that rhyme with Joe Biden. So
Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. They're getting tons of funding from these countries, and that's where this corruption really starts to manifest horribly. So S2,
Big Pharma had its own country.
Yeah,
They do. They were in China for a little while.
well, I mean, that's a scary thing, and that could be a whole episode to talk about the amount of critical resources that are made in China.
Yeah, that we've allowed to be made in China.
Right. Yeah. Like
Used to be made here.
What is it, like 85-90% of pharmaceuticals are made in China?
Between China and India, yeah, probably.
Yeah. So it's insane. S2, what can we learn from history and apply to today and going forward?
There are no coincidences. History doesn't always match, but it certainly doesn't rhyme. But it certainly does rhyme. We've seen this time and time again, and what we see with today's current revolutionaries here in the United States, their argument is, and they really believe this, is that the reason communism hasn't worked is because it hasn't been implemented globally. COVID
Right.
was that response to that, to implement communism globally. They tried, they lost. They have to have certain global economies to make that happen, and the United States is number one on that, because everybody looks to us as the people that built their own country and survived by fighting for their country. And
Yes.
that's what a lot of other countries are starting to see is now. The thing that I had heard throughout COVID is, when is the United States going to step up? When is the United States going to step up? Well, we stepped up, and here we are. It can be defeated, but it has to be defeated as a team sport. It can't be done one country alone.
Yeah. I'm going to echo something that Mike Stewart put in the comments. I flashed it up earlier, but yeah, in my research, Frank Decoder, I think Decoder, I don't know.
Dicotter.
Okay. An excellent source on this. There's several of his lectures on YouTube. He has had access to the National Archives. Basically, they're essentially their National Archives in a lot of his research, and is a subject matter expert on the history in China and all of the bloodshed. He was the one that uncovered that it wasn't 40 million, it was more like 65 million people that died, based on even off of their records. He's a professor and a published author, and very widely renowned in his history and analysis of China. But anyways, and I think that really the thing that we can take away from this is, we have to be vigilant to these kind of ideologies. One thing that we haven't even touched on in any of this, and it's probably one of the most prevalent reasons why 2020 failed with COVID, why we have failed to become a dictatorship multiple times, is because we're still armed in this country. If you look throughout history, and we haven't touched on this because I really wanted to go after the ideology more than I did like a lot of the methods that they use, the playbook that they used, and we may get to that. But every one of them disarms their population before when they take power. One of the first things is give up your guns in order to be safer.
We'll protect you.
Yeah, so it's the same thing. And anytime you hear that, you have to understand that the people in power, they're still subject to human nature. And human nature is that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So if somebody has that amount of power, unless there's some kind of, spiritual benevolent leader, they're going to fall. But even a spiritual benevolent leader is going to want his populace armed. And that's really the thing that we haven't talked about a lot in this series, but it is one of the biggest plays that they do. And that's what we started with the Second Amendment earlier today, or earlier in this episode. And that's so important that we fight for that. We fight for everything to keep our rights, to have military weapons so that we can defend ourselves, not just against somebody trying to rob our house, but somebody in a position of power that wants to take away our rights. And that's
Second Amendment guarantees personal liberties.
yes. And so, but that's it. We're gonna call it there. Thank you guys for joining us, and thank you S2 and Jeff. I couldn't have done it without you. You guys did a great job. Don't forget, guys, to go check out the Guardian subscription membership on our Patreon and Substack. Just go over there, and if you search Survival Dispatch, it's patreon.com/Survival Dispatch or survivaldispatchnews.substack. You'll find us, and if you sign up there, it's $9.99 in a month. And these, you get 37 e-mags with a comprehensive guide to get you out of any kind of SHTF situation. These are amazing magazines, a $370 value. You get absolutely free. You get our survival guide, 228 pages. That's going to get you out of any kind of situation. And when it comes to survival, you also get some behind the scenes content. You get access to our private Signal chat that gives you guys access to a wealth of information that we can't even share some of it on here because of the oppression that we get from social medias. But go over there, and if you and lastly, if you guys just feel like supporting us as a company, we would greatly appreciate it. We can't do this stuff without you guys, and we appreciate all of the support. So you can go over there and sign up today, and I hope you will. But that's it, and we're going to call it there. Thank you guys for showing up for us here on Sunday night, and until we meet again, God bless America.
Good night.
And they're using the word God again, and they're not hiding from it, and they're not being told to take it down, and they're not saying we can't honor God. In God we trust. So important.
Even in the darkest night, thank God for America. When it's time to stand and fight, thank God for America. Through every struggle, even when we fall, we answer to together.